I've been looking forward to Final Destination Bloodlines from the very moment I learned of its existence. I've recently become a huge Final Destination fan, and to find out there was another one arriving soon was the best news I'd heard in a long, long time. And I must say this movie was more than worth the wait. Not only was it the best Final Destination movie, it's one of my favorite movies of the year. But in order to discuss why I think this movie was so good, I have to explain what I think about the rest of the series. There's something about the concept that is just absolutely magical. So for those of you who don't know, Final Destination is a franchise built around the idea that death is a person or magical force that has a great deal of influence over the universe, and it has a plan for how things are supposed to go. People have a set time and way they are supposed to die, and usually that plan goes perfectly. But every once in a while, for some inexplicable reason, people are randomly given a premonition that they, and a lot of people around them, are going to die in some elaborate way. This could be an airplane explosion, catastrophic car crash, roller coaster malfunction, bridge collapse, anything. This person naturally freaks out and tries to change their fate, and succeeds in saving a few people. However, death does not like when its plans are interfered with, so it gets busy taking out the survivors one by one. Almost always their deaths are much more gruesome and drawn out than the original plan. It's such an incredible, captivating concept that had me hooked instantly. It was originally going to be a script for the X-Files, but it was rejected. And honestly, no disrespect to that show, but I'm so glad it became its own thing. Watching the characters try to win a battle of wits against death itself is just so satisfying. Not only that, but these movies are incredibly funny. It's morbid, sure, but there's nothing more gut-busting than watching paper-thin characters blindly walk into a Rube Goldberg machine to meet the silliest and most traumatizing death imaginable. I honestly can't tell if these movies are supposed to be funny, and that makes them all the better. I don't really find them scary, but that doesn't make me any less invested. The only other time I've ever been that into a horror movie concept is with the Ring franchise. Along the way, several of the movies try to introduce new concepts to add to the lore, with varying levels of success. Final Destination 2 was all about death working backwards to make up for the mess made by the first movie. It is working in reverse order this time around because, as the only survivor from the first movie puts it,
being alive after we were supposed to die, it caused an outward ripple, a rift in death's design.
So, if you had never gotten off the plane, we wouldn't be alive in the first place.
Yes, that's why death is working backwards. It's tying up all the loose ends, sealing the rift once and for all.
It also introduces the idea that if a person dies and is brought back, that can stop death too. I like to read this as death being satisfied, but others see it as interfering with the plan so much that death had to start over, which is also a pretty good explanation. I think the idea of a ripple effect being caused by the unintentional survivors is extremely cool, and the idea of being momentarily dead adds potential for a victim to actually win, which makes things more tense. They created a really interesting dimension to their story, and I was excited to see how the third movie built on it. Well, too bad, because Final Destination 3 literally doesn't mention 2 at all. In fact, the main character researches the events of the first movie, and the second one isn't mentioned, period. None of the characters are mentioned, except in deleted scenes that aren't canon, and none of its ideas are expanded on either. I also think the initial death scene is weak, especially because the person responsible for the crash got off the roller coaster. Why did it still crash? Normally in the opening scene, the main character's actions don't do anything to change the outcome of the main event, because they're helpless to stop it. But this time around, she literally changed the setup, and nothing was different. On top of all that, I think the other death scenes, while funnier and sillier, feel too stupid. Several of them were easily avoidable. I'm all for a little stupidity, and I love goofy stuff like this, but anyone actually in this situation would be able to escape. Don't get me wrong, I was still deeply entertained, and I found myself having a really good time. Because how can you not find this hilarious?
We may feel that our lives are not our own.
I also think the acting was a huge step up in this one. But I'll admit, I was a little bitter about it abandoning a concept I thought was great, alongside it being a little too dumb without fully jumping the shark. But if it's shark jumping you're after, then you have to check out the Final Destination. You like good acting? Too bad. We hired people off Craigslist. You like the effects during the kill scenes? Too bad, now you get this. You like watching people die in increasingly ludicrous ways with intricate Rube Goldberg machines? Too bad. This. It's louder, it's dumber, it's cheaper, and it completely ignores everything established by the first 3 movies. Objectively, this is the worst movie in the franchise, but it's quite possibly the funniest. It takes that extra step into insanity that 3 was too scared to make, and I could not stop laughing the entire time. 4 is bad, but it's the kind of bad that I can't get enough of. I love it. Then comes Final Destination 5, which pioneered the idea of pretending to be a bad movie right up until the end, where it revealed the best ending to a horror movie I've ever seen, bar none. Seriously, the rest of the movie's fine, a little more boring than the rest, but it introduced another fantastic concept. If you kill somebody while death is after you, you take their place in its plan, and whatever time they had left is now yours. That could be a matter of years, or in the case of one unlucky character, just days. Additionally, the surviving characters all get on a plane to go to Paris, which just so happens to be the same flight as the first movie, meaning it was a prequel the whole time. And the people who died on that flight were collateral from the main characters of this movie. Not only is this hilarious, but it's by far the best ending in the series, and like I said before, any horror movie I've ever seen. I was so pumped the moment I realized what was about to happen. And for a long time, that's where the franchise ended. It would have been a good place to end things, with Tony Todd making his return, a few decent kills, and a closing note you can't help but remember. Luckily, the geniuses who hold the copyright decided to give the people who made the live-action Kim Possible movie and Leprechaun Origins a shot. No, I'm not joking. The script was written by the same person who co-wrote the newer Scream movies, and honestly all this puts me off. However, they showed this scene in the trailer, and this instantly restored my faith. It's elaborate, it's stupid, and most of all, it looked like fun. And despite all my warnings, when I actually saw the movie, I realized they managed to make all this into the best movie in the series by far. So let's examine how they did it. Spoiler warning, by the way. The movie starts off with a flashback to 1968, where a young woman and her boyfriend go to the opening night of a restaurant that looks a lot like the Space Needle. We are shown a ton of things going wrong, setting up yet another classic Rube Goldberg of death. A penny gets stuck in an air vent, a chandelier begins to break, the dance floor begins to crack, and a chef is getting a little too ambitious with his flambé. As you'd expect, it all forms a perfect storm. People start falling through the floor, a gas leak starts, and everyone is sent into a blind panic. In her rush to make it to the stairs, a woman is accidentally lit on fire, which lights everything on fire because of the gas leak. Eventually, the building begins to crumble, causing some of the remaining survivors to group up on the glass like the ending of WALL-E. Unfortunately for them, a piano is teetering on the edge of crushing them, but maintains its balance, until the same penny from earlier lands on it and is somehow enough to send it plummeting, taking several victims along with it. It was at this point where I had to prevent myself from bursting out into laughter in the middle of a crowded theater. My friend and I were both losing our minds trying to avoid laughing, and everyone else was completely silent. Luckily for us, it kept going. More people died until there were just 2 left, the young woman and a little kid. They eventually fall as well, and we are suddenly thrust back into the modern day with a completely new character that wasn't at the tower, having a nightmare. This immediately sets it apart from the rest, and I was intrigued to see where it would go. We come to find out that this new person, Stephanie, is the granddaughter of the woman from the dream, but they've never met. She's been having this dream for over 2 months, and it is ruining her grades. So she comes home to see if she can figure out what's going on, and eventually tracks down her grandmother. She's been avoiding death for over 20 years, catching it as it sets up scheme after scheme to get her killed. But it finally got the last laugh, because she got diagnosed with terminal cancer. She tries to get Stephanie to prepare for death coming for them. Unfortunately, she comes on a little strong, and Stephanie doesn't believe her. So she steps outside despite seeing Death's trap, and allows herself to be killed to prove it to Stephanie. Very cool. What follows is a sequence of establishing the rest of the victims, characters, at the funeral. We've got Stephanie's mom, her uncle, a handful of cousins, and her brother Charlie. Along the way, we are shown countless fake-outs, red herrings, and misdirects. For example, one of the characters breaks a cup and doesn't realize that a giant glass shard fell into the ice. The ice is then used in the drinks almost everyone has at the party, but it doesn't tell you who. And anytime any character takes a sip, you expect them to be the one who got unlucky. The filmmakers knew this, of course, and spend the next 5 minutes hitting you with fake-out after fake-out in the middle of exposition, where every single time a character takes a drink it feels tense, only for the glass to then just fly out of the cup and onto the lawn. Unfortunately for the uncle, he doesn't notice, and it goes right through his foot. Then a lawnmower gets button activated somehow, and it does a wheelie right onto his face, killing him immediately. It's stupid, it's ridiculous, and it's definitely impossible, but it's just believable enough that I could buy into it for the sake of hilarity. Meanwhile, Stephanie has done some studying and decides to present her theory to the rest of the family. Over the past 50 years, death has been slowly taking out all the patrons at the restaurant. Everyone who was there was supposed to die, but Stephanie's grandma saved them all, and that means that death has to start from the beginning and work its way through every single person. However, this is where things get interesting. If everyone was supposed to die that night, that means they weren't supposed to have kids, and that means those kids never should have existed at all. And in Death's eyes, that means they need to be dealt with as well. So once Death was finished with someone who was at the restaurant, it would then go down that person's bloodline until they were all dead too. For example, Stephanie's family tree looks like this. Grandma Iris and Grandpa Paul were both at the restaurant, and Death got Paul pretty early because he died so quickly in the original plan. His bloodline would normally be next, but Iris was still alive, so Death skipped over them for now. Once it eventually came back for Iris, it got her, and then moved to her firstborn child, Stephanie's uncle. Her uncle had 3 children, which means it would go for them first, before going after his younger sister, Stephanie's mom. Once she was out of the picture, it would go for her, and then her brother. It had been doing this for years, and was almost finished, as Iris was supposed to be the second to last person to die. At this point in the movie, Stephanie tries to convince everyone that her oldest son is next, but no one believes her. So he goes to work at a tattoo parlor, where the scene from the trailers plays. And like I said before, this scene is incredible. It's so stupid, but not nearly as stupid as the reveal that he actually survives this. That's right, despite his skull being on the poster, and being lit on fire, the eldest cousin survives with barely a scratch. Stephanie, relieved that he's okay, tries to keep him safe from all threats she sees around her. However, Death has other plans in mind, and takes the next youngest cousin instead, crushing her in a garbage truck. This scene is even funnier than the cookout one, and what happens next is even funnier. The reason it skipped over the first cousin is because he was conceived when his mom was cheating on his dad, meaning he's not part of the bloodline, and is therefore safe. Him being skipped over forces her to admit this to everyone, and it is hilarious. Following that, they realize that means the youngest cousin is next, and he tries to read Grandma's notes to figure out how to stop Death. Eventually, he finds a note saying JB found someone who survived. So they race off to find whoever JB is, and as it turns out, it's Tony Todd. He's back, and he's actually the little kid Iris tried to save in her vision. As it turns out, the reason he knows Death's game is because he's been following Death for years, and he's also on the list. Much like Iris, he too was diagnosed with a terminal disease and doesn't have long to live. But he explains to our main characters that they can kill someone to take their spot in Death's plan, just like in Final Destination 5. And other than that, death is unavoidable. But it doesn't have to be permanent. If someone were to temporarily die and be brought back, it would break the curse. And that's how the main character in Final Destination 2 survived. There was a deleted scene in the third movie that revealed she died, but since it was cut, it's not canon, and that means she's alive, and this movie finally confirms it. So the next victim comes up with a plan to eat peanuts, which he's allergic to, die temporarily, and then be brought back since they're in a hospital. Unfortunately, it doesn't work, and Death turns on an MRI machine, killing both him and his older half-brother. This scene is hilarious, but it's 100% not safe for YouTube, like most of the kills in this series. But Death has finally gotten everyone on that side of the family tree, and a bonus victim, and can now go after Stephanie's side of the tree, starting with her mom. She decides that she doesn't want to die, actually, and they take a trip to Grandma's spiky cabin because they think it's safer. Death, of course, was ready for them, and breaks Stephanie's seatbelt, trapping her in the RV, and blows up the cabin, burning her mom and burying her brother. Luckily, everyone survived just long enough for her mom to get crushed to death by a light pole, so that Charlie would go save his sister. While all that was happening, the RV filled with water and Stephanie nearly drowns, but Charlie brings her back. Just like Final Destination 2, the main character survives by dying temporarily. But then like a month later, some nerd goes, actually you didn't die because your heart didn't stop. And then, the same Penny from the beginning of the movie derails a train, which causes both Stephanie and her brother to get crushed to death by logs. Incredible. There are so many things I love about that ending, and the movie as a whole. Firstly, the movie is extremely funny. It seems like the creators leaned into what Final Destination fans liked about the first 5, which is over-the-top setups and the comedy and entertainment that comes from it. Additionally, most fans liked the lore and the concept, so they decided to expand upon it even more. All of this was absolutely the right call, and so was adding a bunch of stupid jokes on top of it. These movies went from being unintentionally hilarious to just as funny, but on purpose this time, and that boosted my enjoyment a ton. I haven't laughed as hard in a movie theater in such a long time. Additionally, I loved the concept of death coming after the bloodline of someone who escaped it previously. It was also a great excuse for why it took so long for death to reach the family, and Tony Todd's character. Speaking of him, it finally gave him some backstory and explained how he knew everyone and was such a convenient exposition device. Before this, I, like a lot of people, kind of assumed he was death in human form, giving the main characters in each movie false hope. But the fact that I was proven wrong is fantastic, and I'm really glad Tony Todd got one last go as the character before he died. The movie was also dedicated to him, which I thought was a great touch. I love that this movie did something different with the lore, and it felt like it was finally building on that concept brought forth by Final Destination 2. It's not quite the same, but the fact that it not only acknowledged that movie, acknowledged the fact that its character did in fact survive, and expanded upon things in a similar direction, I could not have been happier. It feels like what the rest of the movies should have been doing this whole time after 2 raised the stakes. But as much as I like this movie, I do have some complaints. First and foremost, it felt like the cinematographers only knew one camera trick. They would slowly turn the camera to a Dutch angle and then pan, tilt, or arc the camera around, causing a disorienting effect. This was really effective on top of the restaurant, causing a feeling of vertigo and heightening Iris' sense of unease, but they kept doing it over and over. Anytime Death started putting a plan into motion, they did that exact same trick, sometimes multiple times. I felt like I was a confused dog trying to understand something by tilting my head. Over and over and over. Additionally, if the oldest cousin wasn't originally part of the plan, why did all this happen at the tattoo parlor? Don't get me wrong, it's a fun scene and it made for a great trailer, and I genuinely love the fact that the poster and trailer are a fake-out. But in the rules of the universe, why did this happen? Was it all a coincidence, or did Death do it on purpose? If Death did it, why? To fake out the audience? The next step of Death's plan was to kill the middle cousin with the garbage truck, and nothing any of the other characters did had any influence over that. So it's not like Death did this as bait for the characters. So why did this happen? Personally, I'm going to believe that all of this was just a coincidence, and it just did that without Death's help. I think it's way funnier that way. I'm not that mad though, it was a pretty cool fake out. And the reveal was pretty hilarious. Also, maybe I'm just being a little greedy here, but I would have liked maybe 1 or 2 more death scenes. Multiple characters die in multiple death scenes, and this movie was a bit under 2 hours. I feel like 1 or 2 more was doable, but the ones we did get were fantastic, so I'm okay with it. But why do I think this movie is better than the rest, despite all its flaws? Well, for starters, they're all pretty deeply flawed movies. And don't get me wrong, that's a good chunk of the reason why I like them. But I think Bloodlines has the fewest flaws of any of the movies, and also has the biggest strengths hiding those flaws. For starters, I think the opening scene is by far the best in the franchise. It's frantic, it's chaotic, and it's gruesome. The scale of hundreds of people dying is pure spectacle, and one that cannot be ignored. It's almost too much to handle, and that makes it perfect. I think it's the longest opening scene of any of the movies, and it puts that to good use. Additionally, the kills are so much more silly and convoluted in this one, without crossing too far into the supernatural like the first movie did. I don't mind a little bit of ghosts or haunting or anything like that, but it always felt out of place in Final Destination. Luckily, there's none of that here, and all the absurdity I could ask for. It's also the longest movie in the series by about 10 minutes, and none of that time is wasted. In fact, I think it could have been a bit longer if it wanted to. It's paced exceptionally well, delivering so many tense scenes and so much plot, weaving between them beautifully. In fact, quite a few of the plot scenes feature a sense of unease or tension themselves, like the cookout. I also think the characters are by far the most developed in the entire series, and it's sad to see most of them go, which isn't often the case in horror movies. I also just like how stupid and fully committed this movie is. The penny from the intro appears multiple times and has an insane KD ratio in this movie. Seriously, I could easily watch a horror comedy about this penny flying around killing people. It's that funny to me. It also rolls around during the credits, which is cinema gold. That being said, if there's one thing I love the most about horror movies, it's the rules. The rules are everything to me. It's part of the reason why I love Scream so much. They not only have rules, they call attention to them, and they're part of the killer's plan.
You gave it up. Now you're no longer a virgin. That virgin. Now you gotta die. Those are the rules.
They are a powerful force in a horror movie, especially if there's an element of mystery to the story. For example, in both the original and American versions of The Ring, the main character has to figure out how to save herself and her family from the curse of being haunted by a videotape. Through their investigation, they find the tape was cursed by a little girl who was thrown into a well, and she exacts her revenge by cursing anyone who watches the tape to die in 7 days. On the last day before the main character dies, they find the well she was thrown in, and find her body. They lay her to rest, and as time runs out for the main character, it seems like the day is saved, because she doesn't die. But then, in a shocking twist, the main character's ex-husband is killed when his time runs out, even though the main character was spared. Then, and only then, it is revealed why the main character survived. It's because the only way to defeat the tape is to make a copy of it and curse somebody else, which she did by giving it to her ex. It's a fantastic way to pull the rug out from the characters and the audience, and a lot of movies have followed suit, including every single Final Destination movie, this one included. In my opinion, I think this is essential to getting the movies right. In The Ring, it's possible to escape death, but the rules aren't clear for the main character until it's too late. In Final Destination, the main idea is that nobody escapes death. It is inevitable that once you're in death's crosshairs, you can't escape until you die, even if it's just for a little while. That's the rule, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Sure, you can take somebody else's place, but that means you're just living on borrowed time, and as Final Destination 5 shows, you never know when it'll run out. In order for a horror movie's twist to be satisfying, or to not feel cheap, it has to obey the rules it established throughout. That is why the reveal in The Ring is so effective. The rules were followed, but the characters were wrong. The same goes for Final Destination. In the first movie, they assumed that death was done coming after them because they intervened and prevented the trap. But death had only taken a break. The characters were wrong, and are now shown that death is still targeting them, and that means they will never be safe. Even in 2, the main character still dies, and then is brought back. They try doing the exact same thing here, but fail, which results in both of them dying. This is a perfect and absurd ending, and most importantly, it plays by the pre-established rules, but does something the audience wouldn't expect. I knew something was going to happen at the end, because it always does. I fully expected Stephanie to survive and for Death to take out her brother in front of her, because it skipped her and moved on. However, by taking both of them out on a technicality, genius. Side note, these trailers are hilariously deceptive, and you know I love that. If they announced they were making 10 more Final Destination movies with this exact sense of humor and scope in mind, it would be the best news I could ever possibly receive. I cannot thank the people who made this movie enough. It felt like it was made special just for me. And because of that, I'm going to give this movie a 9 out of 10. If you've seen the previous movies, go watch this one as soon as possible. And if you haven't, do yourself a favor and give them a try. If you like trashy horror, you won't find anything better. Except maybe Killer Clowns from Outer Space, but it's hard to compete with perfection. And that's all I've got for you today. Also, if you made it this far into the video, please consider subscribing and liking. It helps my channel grow if you do. Additionally, if you'd like, you can leave me a comment letting me know your favorite horror movie, and I'll give your comment a heart. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Hey, 5-star review, yeah? Like and subscribe and all the things.